This is tier list for, what is it now? OB6, oh yeah, it's OB60. Round it off. We good, we good. This is tier list for OB60. Again, I said it previously, but I'll say it again. This is going to be a bit quicker than usual. I'm not going to cover every champion in depth because a lot of champions are still in the same place. Additionally, this is again for competitive play. Obviously, it's slightly different for casual play, for ranked play. This is with competitive esports in mind, but it bleeds over somewhat into casual and ranked games. So you can take it with a grain of salt, but yeah. So starting off, Roxas. Roxas, I think I previously put an A tier. I think he's A+ now. He's a solid all-around pick. I know that you guys might be thinking, oh, well, he's SS, he's S+, but it's hard to argue that when he's not prioritized super heavily. Like, there are definitely maps where you just go, fuck Andrew entirely. Like, we did even see yesterday in the PPL, we saw him not picked at all on certain maps. He is still map dependent. He's definitely worthy of an S+, potentially even an SS on certain maps. Like, you see Serpent Beach, for instance. You could definitely consider him potentially S+, SS there. But since we have to take all maps into consideration, and we also have to take in the draft phase in consideration, like, what picks need to be prioritized and what picks can like wait until a little bit later in the draft, I'd say he's A+. He's just a very strong carry pick right now, and that's as simple as it is. Ashe, still S tier, I'd say. You're going to be seeing a lot of tanks high up in the tier list again this time. He's just one of the best tank options, so simple as that. Barrack, same place as Ashe. They do very different things, but they're also both very strong in their ways. Ashe the more aggressive, Barrack the more defensive, but they're both solid picks. Can be picked anytime in the draft. Usually you'll see them picked very early on. Bomb King goes with the Andrew, I think. I think both of these carries are two of the highest priorities in the draft phase, especially carry-wise. I think both Bomb King and Andrew have potential to be picked earlier than certain tanks, but on certain maps and against, like, with certain plans in mind, you might see them picked a bit later on. But out of the carries specifically, you're gonna see a lot of Andrew and Bomb King prioritization. Buck, I know that we played it in the PPL, but Buck is still B tier. You know, B tier stands for pocket pick. It's really as simple as that. A lot of the time people think that the tiers are just straight up, this is better than this, which is better than this, which is better than this. But that's not really the case. Yes, the tiers are a form of ranking, but realistically speaking, they're more of a placement. You know, I'm not placing Buck in B tier because he's bad. I'm placing him because he's a pocket pick. He's reliant on certain situations to be able to play him properly. And usually speaking, you're going to be picking him as one specific strategy. So that's kind of where the Buck is right now. He can definitely be very good, but he is good in a pocket pick situation. Cassie, debatable with Cassie here. Potentially she could drop down to A tier. I mean, I would maybe argue that she is A tier, but I do think out of the carries, like, she is a solid pick, and she is good on very, like, quite a few maps. I do think, though, that if you're looking at the carries that aren't prioritized, aka not Andrew, not Bomb King, not Maeve, then Cassie's kind of the in-between there. She's not as highly prioritized as them, but she's also probably going to be picked a bit more than maybe the Shaw or the Lex or something like that. So I'd still say she's A+, but just barely. You know, she's really on the brink of being A. Drogos, he's a solid A, I'd say now. The thing with Drogos is that right now it kind of comes down to this. There's two factors for a Drogos. There's, do you have the Andrew? Does the enemy team have an Andrew? You know, those are the two factors. If you have the Andrew and the enemy team doesn't have the Andrew, then you can pick the Drogos, perfectly fine. But then it comes down to, well, if you have the Andrew, then you can pick the Bomb King and force them to pick the Drogos, you know? You have two blasters that are really good right now. You have Drogos and you have Andrew, or you have Drogos and you have Bomb King. And if you pick the Andrew plus the Bomb King, it forces them to either not pick a blaster or pick the Drogos, which is not really ideal into an Roxas. So he is good, but once Andro comes into play, then it's really difficult to actually pick the Jogos. You can do it still, like if you're playing on Serpent, you still can pick the Jogos into an Andro, but a lot of teams and a lot of players are just going to say, no, fuck that. They got an Andro, I'm out. I'm not picking the Jogos. So I'd say he's A tier. He's on par with Bomb King, like straight up like damage and viability wise, but he really struggles in the draft phase right now. EV B+, I put her in B before, but I think B+ is more realistic. She's not really a pocket pick. She's just a situational pick. But again, she can't really be played right now because of her fucking bugs. Like, until they fix the bugs, I don't know how many times I have to say, until they fix the bugs with her desync and with her triple blink, you're not going to see her played much. You may see some reprieve EV or some over the moon EV here and there in games that aren't as crucial, or maybe as a pocket pick to throw people off, but it's so risky right now. So I just say situational pick. Maybe you'll see it here and there. Fernando, A tier. Probably the worst of the tanks right now, honestly. He's definitely more of a situational pick than the other tanks. You know, like Ashe and Barrick, you can just pick them whenever, but you're not going to be seeing any early picks of Fernando. If anything, you'll see last picks or second to last pick Fernando, say, in specific situations where you go, oh, okay, well, this is the time when we should probably take the Fernando. You know, we saw in Frozen Guard when we played it, we had the 2 tanks already and a buck, and we said, well, we can get a triple tank here, but if we do, it has to be a Fernando, something that can push with the buck, you know? And that's kind of the situations you're going to be seeing Fernando in when you go, okay, this is actually a good time to pick Fernando. Not just, let's get a tank, let's take Fernando. It's very rarely you're going to see that. Brock, B+. Situational pick. Again, you could potentially put him in B, but I wouldn't really say he's a pocket pick. He's just a very situational pick. There's definitely been some experimentation with him, but no one's really tried to bring it to proper viability. If you're going to play it, it's going to have to be on specific maps with specific comps, so he's just kind of a situational pick right now. Grover, A+. Grover's kind of in an interesting place where you can always pick him. Like, you can always play the Grover. He definitely does better against certain comps, certain tanks especially, but you can really always pick him, just like the Bomb King, just like the Andro. So he's just a solid carry, I'd say. I would put him above, like, Cassie, for instance. Like, he's probably higher priority than the Cassie, but I think they both kind of serve a similar role. Grover's just a solid all-around DPS, honestly. Inara, also A+ tier. We're filling it up here pretty quickly, but Inara is kind of the in-between the strong tanks and the quote-unquote weak tank in Fernando. She's not really situational, but when you pick the Inara, you have to do certain things in certain ways. Like, you have to play around the fact that you have an Inara. Like, if you're going to have the Inara, unlike the Barrick, unlike the Ashe, unlike the Makoa, with them, you can just do whatever you want. You know, you can just decide how you're going to play on the fly, and you can play very dynamically. Whereas with Inara, you kind of have to have a specific strategy in mind. Not really a pocket pick, but you need to go into the game saying, look, we have an Inara. We need to be able to utilize this Inara, so we have to play in a certain way, which makes her kind of weaker than the other tanks because you really have to play around her. Genos, again, if you didn't watch the tier list from last week, then you'll be a bit confused, but I made a sort of separate but sort of not tier list for the supports, specifically the heal-oriented supports. So obviously Pip and Grover aren't really heal-oriented supports. They're really damage dealers with heal potential. But Janos, Ying, Sarris, and Maldamba are heal-oriented supports, thus they have their kind of own separate tier list, still following the same guidelines that the tiers have, just parted away from the rest of the characters. So Janos still S, same as last week. I'd say he's just there. He's one of the best options out of the really 2 options in Maldamba and Janos. Kinessa B+, still the same thing, I feel. She struggles right now in the meta. There's a lot of flank potential. There's a lot of heavy hitting tanks, so she can definitely struggle. But in situations where she has potential, she can do very good. So situational pick, which is what B+ kind of stands for. Lex, A tier. Lex got some recent buffs. I'd say he's a perfectly fine DPS. I think for the first time in a while now, Lex is actually viable on maps other than Jaguar Falls, We haven't really seen it yet, but like Bright Marsh, even potentially like Frog Isle, Serpent Beach, any of these kind of like smaller point fight maps, I think he has potential. And the one nice thing about Lex is that he's actually okay against Andro, which is a big deal because there's not a lot of counter picks to the Andro, and Lex actually does fairly well against Andro in a lot of situations. So I'd say he's a solid pick, and I think you could potentially even pick him on maps other than Jaguar now. Leon, A tier. Leon's just like the basic DPS, you know? Like, you're not going to see her picked a lot, but like when you really need a random DPS, like Haven damage DPS, it's probably going to be Leon, you know? Like Cassie can be more aggressive, Grover's a bit more defensive. Leon's just the in-between of, we need a damage dealer, let's get Leon. If anything, she's pretty solid on like Frozen Guard and Fish Market, these kind of open maps with long line of sights. But besides that, she's just a damage dealer, you know? It's as simple as that. Maeve, S tier still. Maeve and Andro are kind of comparable right now. I'd say the only real difference is that Andro's ult is really not that great right now. Like, Andro can get value with his ult, but it's very hard to. You have to play in a specific way, and you have to really find a great opportunity to get your Andro ult off. Whereas Maeve has an always consistently good ultimate, you know? Which is a huge deal. Besides that, I'd say Andro and Maeve are very comparable. Like, they fill similar roles, and they both do respectable damage, get respectable flanks off, but Maeve just has a constantly annoying ultimate, which is a big deal. So I'd say solid S tier. She's just, I don't know what more to say. She's just a solid DPS with a fantastic ultimate. Makoa, still S+. I mean, nothing's changed. Well, okay, that's not entirely true. The one thing that has changed is that you now, when you hook somebody and you miss your shot, you do not get bonus damage on the following shot, which, realistically speaking, is not that big of a deal. It's kind of hard to say because some players with higher ping struggle a bit with getting that first shot off, whereas players with lower ping tend to get more consistently instant shots. So if anything, it hurts players with high ping, but I mean, it's really not that big of a deal. So Makoa is still S+ tier. Nothing more to say about that, really. Pip. I moved Pip down to C tier. There's just no reason to play Pip right now. Like, he's jack of all trades, master of none, and his ultimate's not even that good right now. Like, with so much CC on the table, with Bomb King, with Snake, even Janos, with Torvald, there's no reason to pick him. You can just buy Resilience and then you're saved, you know? There's nothing he can do right now. Ruckus, S tier, along with the other tanks. He's kind of the in-between of Ashe and Barrack. Barrack's a more defensive tank that sets up and holds an area. Ashe pushes deep and tries to get good angles and shoulder peeks a lot. Ruckus is the in-between where he's not defensive. He doesn't sit back. He can go aggressive, but he also has nothing to like shoulder peek with. So he's a little bit in between there. And the good thing about Ruckus is that he's a massive tank killer. He's very good against the Makoa, against the Torvald, even against Barrack. So he has mobility, he has high ground control, he has options to play both defensively and aggressively. So he's a very much all-around tank. The only thing he lacks would be some form of shoulder peek ability, which usually you'll have another tank anyways that can cover that option. So just an all-around tank, or all-around good tank, and a tank killer as well. So makes him especially good. Sarris is just a healer. Shaolin, solid DPS. I had him a lot higher last week or last tier list. I think I had him in S before, but realistically speaking, like, we still see him a little bit, but we see him in a similar role as we do with the Leon, with the Drogos, where you can pick him. He's fine. Like, you can do a good job with Shaolin, and you can really pop off with Shaolin. You can get really fucking like good flanks, and you can get really hype plays with Shaolin, but he can also be a bit risky sometimes. There's potential, I'd say, for him to be A+. Like, you could potentially argue that Cassie and Shaolin should swap places here, and in the coming week, we might see that happen. But for the time being, since I haven't seen much Shaolin, and I think I've probably seen more Cassie than Shaw, I'd say Shaw is just a solid DPS that you can pick when you want to, you know? Skye, I mean, I still think that Skye has potential to be A tier. Like, she is still a tank shredder, but I think the issue with Skye right now is that other flanks are moving up. Like, Maeve's going even higher and higher, and Roxas is going higher and higher. Even arguably Bomb King still has some flank potential, and he's going higher and higher again. So Skye's kind of falling off again, but it wouldn't surprise me too much if we see some pocket pick Skye. I don't want to say she's a pocket pick just yet. I'd still say situational, but in the coming weeks, we'll kind of see if she's a perfectly fine carry or if she's a pocket pick. And right now, she's kind of in between those two. We'll just have to see what happens. Snake and Janos still comparable, I'd say. It's very much personal preference. You see some players preferring Snake, some players preferring Janos. Map dependent is, and then ultimate dependent, you know. Like, you can take either of them. It just 100%, to me at least, comes down to what comp you have and what comp you're playing against. That will, in my mind at least, 100% determine which one I'm going to take. Strix, B tier, pocket pick if anything. I arguably even potentially C tier. Like, I see no reason to pick him. But maybe, again, we argued this last week that maybe there could be some janky pocket pick potential on bigger maps where you pick double sniper or you put Strix with a Grover and you just fucking run around doing God knows what. But right now, I don't see it. Tallis. I mean, I would like to keep Tallis in the new section because we haven't really seen him in competitive play yet. Like, we haven't practiced him at all. And other teams haven't, in EU at least, haven't practiced him at all because we're not allowed to play him. We're not allowed to pick him for the first couple of weeks of his release. So he did get some nice buffs. I will say that. He did get some nice buffs. So I think 100% guaranteed he was C tier before. Now maybe he has slightly more potential with the buffs. But hard to say because we haven't seen him, you know? We haven't gotten to see him yet, so for the time being, I'd still say he's just C tier, you know? If no one's picking him, it's probably going to be for a reason, and that's because he's not great. We'll see, though, with the damage buffs and the changes to how he heals. We'll see. Torvald. Finally, Makoa gets some company up in S+ tier. I think Torvald is a solid tank pick. I mean, you saw in the PPL, and you're going to continue to see teams are going to prioritize two things, and that's Makoa and that's Torvald. Usually, you're going to see Makoa banned because Makoa is more annoying than Torvald. But when Makoa is banned, sometimes you'll see Torvald banned, and sometimes you might not, and he'll be first picked. It's really as simple as that. Like, when either of those two tanks aren't banned, they're going to be first picked. That's what the S tier stands for, and that's where they both are. If they're not banned, they're going to be first picked. Simple as that. I mean, you saw it yesterday. There's solid evidence yesterday, so. And I don't know what we'll see in NA today. NA don't seem to prioritize Makoa as much. I'm not sure why, but they don't seem to prioritize the Makoa as much. And I'm sure we're going to see Torvald bans and Torvald picks very early on in the draft phase in NA today. So expect to see that. He's a solid all-around tank. He can fit into any comp. He can be a solo tank. He can be a duo tank. He can be a triple tank. He fits into everything, you know? He's perfect for any team comp, and that's kind of why he's so strong right now. Meanwhile, on the other end, Tyra's garbage. Tyra's still garbage. She's been garbage for a long time. She has nothing. Victor. Victor's... I mean, Victor's kind of like this in between B+ and B tier right now. He's not really a pocket strat, but he also doesn't quite belong in B+ in my opinion. Like, I don't see many situations to pick Victor in. Like, I could think of one or two maybe, but even that's a stretch, you know. But he's also not really a pocket pick. It's just there's not really any reason to pick him, you know. He gets dicked on by the flanks. He gets dicked on by the tanks. If you want to pick the Victor, you have to make so much room for him. Like, you just have to play around him so much. He's like the Inara of carries, where you pick him and it's like, we have a Victor. Everything we do has to be around the fact that we have a Victor. And that's that's not really a legitimate pick then when there's so many good carries available. You know, there's Maeve, there's Andrew, there's BK, there's Drogos, there's Cassie, there's Grover, you know? This is why would you pick Victor? When you have to focus your team comp and how you play around the Victor. Why would you do that when there's all those other carries open? It's pointless. It makes no sense. Willow B+, situational pick. If anything, I think Willow could be okay on certain maps, but she still struggles with the same things that we mentioned last week of she has no option to go aggressive, which is a big deal right now. When you have the other carries like Maeve, like Andrew, like Bomb King, all of those carries have one thing in common, and that's they can play defensively and they can chill, but then when it matters, they can also push. And that's what Willow lacks. She only has the option to sit back and spam left click. And that's just, it's not viable, you know? It just makes it not viable. So, situational pick. Maybe we'll see some Willow on certain maps against certain comps, but I find it unlikely because why bother when you could pick Drogos or Bomb King? Ying. I mean, yeah, Ying's a healer. She's an option, just like the Sarris, you know? I mean, we kind of got proof yesterday that the only time we're going to see Ying or Sarris is when either Janus or Snake is banned. That's it. That's the only reason. And we saw it yesterday, and we're going to continue seeing that until they're changed, or healing in general is changed, or Janus or Snake is nerfed, you know? That's just how it's going to be. They're picked when one of the other two is banned. Last but not least, we have Jhin. Jin's like, I don't know. He's a pocket pick. Slightly more than a pocket pick, honestly. He's viable on a couple maps with certain comps in mind and against certain comps. It's just there's no real good reason to pick him for the most part. But I mean, we saw yesterday that Jhin got banned against Simsilo, and that's kind of the situation that Jin's in right now, where yeah, you can pull him off, and yeah, he can be annoying, but it's kind of just like it's an annoying pick, and that's about it, really. So yeah, there's not really much to say about it. It's just annoying. So yeah, that's the tier list for OB60. I tried to make it a bit quicker than normal. Just try to get through it so you guys can get your little picture and put it on fucking the Paladin subreddit or whatever.